It's an amazing moment, and I think will usher in a lot of acceptance.
Here's the President of the United States to sign the bill.
There's my
Yes, we did. You are welcome. This is a good day.
Yes, it is.
Everybody. Thank you. I am just overwhelmed. This is a very good day, and I want to thank all of you, especially the people on this stage, but each and every one of you who've been working so hard on this, members of my staff who worked so hard on this. I couldn't be prouder. 66 years ago, in the dense, snow-covered forests of Western Europe, Allied forces were beating back a massive assault in what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. And in the final days of fighting, a regiment in the 80th Division of Patton's Third Army came under fire. The men were traveling along a narrow trail. They were exposed and they were vulnerable. Hundreds of soldiers were cut down by the enemy. And during the firefight, a private named Lloyd Corwin tumbled 40 feet down the deep side of a ravine. And dazed and trapped, he was as good as dead. But one soldier, a friend, turned back. And with shells landing around him, amid smoke and chaos and the screams of wounded men, this soldier, this friend, scaled down the icy slope, risking his own life to bring Private Corwin to safer ground. Now, for the rest of his years, Lloyd credited this soldier, this friend, named Andy Lee, with saving his life, knowing he would never have made it out alone. It was a full 4 decades after the war, when the two friends reunited in their golden years, that Lloyd learned that the man who saved his life, his friend Andy, was gay. He had no idea. And he didn't much care. Lloyd knew what mattered. He knew what had kept him alive, what made it possible for him to come home and start a family and live the rest of his life. It was his friend. And Lloyd's son is with us today. And he knew that valor and sacrifice are no more limited by sexual orientation than they are by race or by gender or by religion or by creed. That what made it possible for him to survive the battlefields of Europe is the reason that we are here today. That's the reason we are here today. So this morning, I am proud to sign a law that will bring an end to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It is a law This law I'm about to sign will strengthen our national security and uphold the ideals that our fighting men and women risk their lives to defend. No longer will our country be denied the service of thousands of patriotic Americans who were forced to leave the military, regardless of their skills, no matter their bravery or their zeal, no matter their years of exemplary performance, because they happen to be gay. No longer will tens of thousands of Americans in uniform be asked to live a lie or look over their shoulder in order to serve the country that they love. As Admiral Mike Mullen has said, our people sacrifice a lot for their country, including their lives. None of them should have to sacrifice their integrity as well. That's why I believe this is the right thing to do for our military. That's why I believe it is the right thing to do, period. Now, many fought long and hard to reach this day. I want to thank the Democrats and Republicans who put conviction ahead of politics to get this done together. I want to recognize Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Harry Reid. Today we're marking a historic milestone, but also the culmination of two of the most productive years in the history of Congress, in no small part because of their leadership. And so we are very grateful to them. I want to thank Joe Lieberman and Susan. And Susan Collins. And I think Carl Levin's still working. But I want to add Carl Levin. They held their shoulders to the wheel in the Senate. I'm so proud of Susan Davis, who's on the stage. And a guy you might know, Barney Frank. They kept up the fight in the House, and I've got to acknowledge Patrick Murphy, a veteran himself, who helped lead the way in Congress. I also want to commend our military leadership. Ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a topic in my first meeting with Secretary Gates, Admiral Mullen, and the Joint Chiefs. We talked about how to end this policy. We talked about how success in both passing and implementing this change depended on working closely with the Pentagon, and that's what we did. And 2 years later, I am confident that history will remember well the courage and the vision of Secretary Gates, of Admiral Mike Mullen, who spoke from the heart and said what he believed was right. Of General James Cartwright, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and Deputy Secretary William Lynn, who is here. Also, the authors of the Pentagon's review, Jay Johnson and General Carter Ham, who did outstanding and meticulous work. And all those who laid the groundwork for this transition. And finally, I want to express my gratitude to the men and women in this room who have worn the uniform of the United States Armed Services. I want to thank all the patriots who are here today, all of them who were forced to hang up their uniforms as a result of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but who never stopped fighting for this country and who rallied and who marched and fought for change. I want to thank everyone here who stood with them in that fight. Because of these efforts, in the coming days, we will begin the process laid out by this law. Now, the old policy remains in effect until Secretary Gates, Admiral Mullen, and I certify the military's readiness to implement the repeal. And it's especially important for service members to remember that. But I've spoken to every one of the service chiefs, and they are all committed to implementing this change swiftly and efficiently. We are not going to be dragging our feet to get this done. Now, with any change, there's some apprehension. That's natural. But as Commander-in-Chief, I am certain that we can effect this transition in a way that only strengthens our military readiness. The people will look back on this moment and wonder why it was ever a source of controversy in the first place. I have every confidence in the professionalism and patriotism of our service members. Just as they have adapted and grown stronger with each of the other changes, I know they will do so again. I know that Secretary Gates, Admiral Mullen, as well as the vast majority of service members themselves share this view. And they share it based on their own experiences, including the experience of serving with dedicated, duty-bound service members who were also gay. As one special operations warfighter said during the Pentagon's review, this was one of my favorites. It echoes the experience of Lloyd Corwin decades earlier. We have a gay guy in the unit. He's big, he's mean, he kills lots of bad guys. No one cared that he was gay. And I think that sums up perfectly the situation. Finally, I want to speak directly to the gay men and women currently serving in our military. For a long time, your service has demanded a particular kind of sacrifice. You've been asked to carry the added burden of secrecy and isolation, and all the while you've put your lives on the line for the freedoms and privileges of citizenship that are not fully granted to you. You're not the first to have carried this burden. For while today marks the end of a particular struggle that has lasted almost 2 decades, this is a moment more than 2 centuries in the making. There will never be a full accounting of the heroism demonstrated by gay Americans in service to this country. Their service has been obscured in history. It's been lost to prejudices that have waned in our own lifetimes. But at every turn, at every crossroads in our past, we know gay Americans fought just as hard, gave just as much to protect this nation and the ideals for which it stands. There can be little doubt. There were gay soldiers who fought for American independence, who consecrated the ground at Gettysburg, who manned the trenches along the Western Front, who stormed the beaches of Iwo Jima. Their names are etched into the walls of our memorials. Their headstones dot the grounds at Arlington. And so, as the first generation to serve openly in our armed forces, you will stand for all those who came before you. And you will serve as role models to all who come after. And I know that you will fulfill this responsibility with integrity and honor, just as you have every other mission with which you've been charged. And you need to look no further than the servicemen and women in this room. Distinguished officers, like former Navy Commander Zoe Dunning. Marines like Eric Alva, one of the first Americans to be injured in Iraq. Leaders like Captain Jonathan Hopkins, who led a platoon into northern Iraq during the initial invasion, quelling an ethnic riot, earning a Bronze Star with valor. He was discharged only to receive emails and letters from his soldiers saying they had known he was gay all along and thought that he was the best commander they ever had. Now, there are a lot of stories like these. Stories that only underscore the importance of enlisting the service of all who are willing to fight for this country. That's why I hope those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen who've been discharged under this discriminatory policy will seek to re-enlist once the repeal is implemented. That is why I say to all Americans, gay or straight, who want nothing more than to defend this country in uniform, your country needs you, your country wants you, and we will be honored to welcome you into the ranks of the finest military the world has ever known. Some of you remember I visited Afghanistan just a few weeks ago. And while I was walking along the rope line, there's a big crowd, about 3,000. A young woman in uniform was shaking my hand, and other people were grabbing and taking pictures. And she pulled me into a hug, and she whispered in my ear, "Get don't ask, don't tell done." And I said to her, "I promise you I will." For we are not a nation that says, "Don't ask, don't tell." We are a nation that says, "Out of many, we are one." We are a nation that welcomes the service of every patriot. We are a nation that believes that all men and women are created equal. Those are the ideals that generations have fought for. Those are the ideals that we uphold today. And now it is my honor to sign this bill into law. This is done.
Well, there's the President of the United States. He just hugged Patrick Murphy, the congressman from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who lost his seat, who was the #1, I think, champion of this cause of getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Of course, he's making the rounds there. He gave a very emotional speech about the history of gay service in the military, heroic service, which was in the closet basically all these years, and now it's going to be no longer an issue. You are allowed to serve. Eventually, we're going to have full implementation of this, where you're going to be allowed to serve in the military, regardless of your orientation, regardless of what it's known to be. I'm going to bring in General Barry McCaffrey right now. Implementation. What is it? How do you react when you think about that? What do you think it's going to be like?
Well, of course, the law says the Secretary of Defense, the President, and the Chairman have to certify it won't affect retention or military readiness. I think that's pro forma. Within a year, this will be largely fully implemented. It's not going to be a big issue.
You know, we got Richard Socarides. I want you to, something that, you know, when we learned about this, a lot of us are just learning. You're an expert. Only 1 in 6 people who are gay in the military say that they will declare, if that's the right word, their orientation. So it isn't like a coming out event kind of thing.
Right. We don't think a lot is going to change. We think it's going to stay pretty much the same, that people are going to serve and their friends are going to know and people who they're close to are going to know if it's important. But if not much is going to change at all. It's going to be, the shocking thing will be how nothing changes.
I agree.
What do you think the reaction is right now on the bases? People watching this on cable television, around the Armed Services Radio, I'm sure there's a mixed reaction. What is it like, you think?
Well, I think most of the serving military decided 4, 5, 6 years ago this was going to happen. So it's really much anticipated, much studied. Again, the last place, Chris, this is going to be an important issue, is in combat units in Afghanistan or Iraq. You know, crawling around in the mud under the machine gun hammering by your ears, no one's thinking of sex, yours or someone else's. So the problems will be legal, social. How do we walk through gay marriage on military posts?
Right.
That'll play out over another year.
What about partnerships?
Well, I think
in the military, you have situations where officers are allowed to be married, obviously, and they have their wives in barracks, and not in barracks, but in housing. How are we going to do that?
Well, I think that's going to be the kind of legal issues they're going to sort through. There's a federal law that defends, man and a woman in marriage.
Right.
That's the next one to go down, and I assume it'll be gone within 5 years.
Effectively. But in terms of the military, let's take a look at what many people in this panel believe is the most significant event. That's the support by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for this change in the law, which Congress enacted. Of course, the president just signed. Let's hear Admiral Mullen and what he said to Congress in what was considered the real history-changing event in this debate.
I've been serving with gays and lesbians my whole career. I went to war with them aboard a destroyer off the coast of Vietnam. I knew they were there, they knew I knew it, and what's more, nearly everyone in the crew knew it. We never missed a mission, never failed to deliver ordnance on target. Readiness was not impaired. What mattered most, what made us a crew, was teamwork and focus on our combat mission.
Mark, the news-making event, give us the calibration on that.
Well, first of all, I think Admiral Mullen up there in his uniform speaking for the armed forces, I think, was very important. He also, as General McCaffrey was saying earlier, there was a lot of resistance in some of the other chiefs, and he stood them down and said, look, this is something we have to do. He also said, along with Secretary Gates in that testimony, that if Congress didn't act to repeal this, ultimately this would be decided in the courts, and that would make it harder for the military to implement it in a thoughtful way.
How so?
Just because I think they would be taken by surprise. They wouldn't be able to control the timetable this way. They've been planning for it, but they can really do it in the way that they want to do it.
Constitutionally, it probably is a much sounder way to go. I think most of us agree it's better that the people's will is behind any right. Here you have the Congress of the United States saying this should be the right, and we support it.
One of the things Mike Mullen did, though, is he changed the discussion and said, this is an integrity issue. And that resonated with the armed forces. You were asking 62,000 allegedly gay and lesbian service members to lie about their orientation. So I thought, again, I agree with both of you, that Mike Mullen played a very crucial role in changing the nature of the discussion.
Boy, he really did. And, the interesting thing is at the end of this, we had, in fact, stopped enforcing the policy. They put in new regulations a couple of times since President Obama has been president, and by the end of this, almost no one was being kicked out. Like any civil rights thing, by the time the law actually catches up to the reality, this law was not really being enforced. But this was probably this here now is probably the President Obama's most significant civil rights speech of his presidency, certainly so far, and maybe of this first term that he'll have. I mean, it's a really important moment when he said there'll never be a full accounting of the heroism of gay and lesbian service members. Very, very emotional, very passionate for the people in this room. All those people in that room, many of the people in the room sued the government to keep their jobs.
Here is one of the few examples in my lifetime where I've seen change politically occur in the thinking of the American people. Obviously, marriage is still a debate in this country, legally, constitutionally, and in terms of popular will. But the popular will is changing here. We have the latest NBC Wall Street Journal poll as we go to break now. Allow gay people to serve openly, 50%. 10 years ago, it was 40%. Don't let them serve at all. Look at this number that's changed at the bottom here. 10 years ago, a fifth of the country said don't let gay people in the military, period. Even if they keep it quiet, that's down to 10%. This is a slow-moving, but compared to any other change in our lives, it's almost chilling how it has changed over just 10 years. We'll be right back to talk about this historic day.